So hello everyone and welcome to the Research Networking Day of CTM Festivals 2023. My name is Anita, Jóri. I'm one of the curators of the Discourse program and also a research associate at Berlin University of the Arts. And what is this Research Networking Day is about? Actually, as the name says, it's a research platform or like a networking platform for students from really diverse fields and disciplines. So we invited for today 9 different presenters who are coming from very different angles of research and talk a little bit about the topic, the theme of the festival, which is portals this year. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. What is this portals about, or what is the theme of the festival? But first of all, just some words about the Research Networking Day in general. So every year we choose different collaborators who we work together with on this project, and this year we have 3 of them. The Berlin University of the Arts, Paderborn University, and also the German Association for Music Business and Music Culture Research, so-called GMM. So thanks a lot for our collaborators, and without them we wouldn't be here today. So this is why I'm very grateful that they are always part of this Research Networking Day. Another thing that I really want to go on with this, saying thanks to all of my colleagues, because also without them we wouldn't be here today. So I especially would like to thank to Tysa Raplinsky, who is also here in the room and who helped me a lot in the selection process of these 9 wonderful presenters who are going to be on stage in a second. Also like to ask Jan Rolf, who is one of our directors, who also helped curating the discourse program. Berit Levita, who is the head of the production team, and I'm sure all of the presenters have been in contact with her, so Berit is also here and helping us the whole day to set up and so on. And also, of course, Zoe Kallert and her group with the technical support, because this event is also live streamed online. So in this way, I would also like to welcome those of you who are joining us online. It's very nice to have you here. Hopefully you are a lot. And because in the room is quite getting warmed up, so I'm expecting even more people here later on. Especially my students have to be here, so where is the rest of the group, by the way? Anyway, so hopefully there will be more people coming later on. And yeah, so welcome those of you who are joining us online once again. Don't forget that you can send in questions also online via the YouTube channel. And also those of you who are here in the room, anytime you can send in your question, raise your hand and we will pass the microphone to you. So let's talk a little bit about portals, about the theme of the festival. Portals can mean so many different things, and I'm going to stick to my very short introduction about the topic. Otherwise, I'm going to talk about this topic 20 minutes long, and I don't want to waste your time on that. But based on the theme or based on the topic, you can read also online about the festival, how CTM thinks or how CTM reflects on this topic. So I'm going to read it out for you now. So sound and music open portals to other realities and to experiences of others. So this is going to be, these 2 points are going to be very important for us later on. During the whole afternoon, you will see. Complex stories of social movements, resistance, and empowerment can resound within sonic fragments. Sound and music can transport listeners to their underlying stories, realities, and modes of experience, drawing them deeply into states of being, emotions, and discourses. And as we get into these transported physical and mental states, emotions, sensations, and memories can also arise. And I think we all had experiences with that. In this state, new collaborations across geographies and cultures, and sometimes even unexpected connections can be made. Such portals and wormholes transport us to real, speculative, and imaginary worlds, which in turn always point back to the experience of the reality's own world's creator. So that's also another important point, that who creates those worlds and who creates those portals and who has access to create those portals. So again, in thinking about music as portals and practices of world building, one must deal with questions of access and exclusion. Who gets access, as I already mentioned, and who is building those different portals, and so on and so forth. And portals can be created by using different techniques. And as mentioned, I think because you all went probably to the opening of CTM and the last 2 days you took part in different concerts maybe, I think you could also feel these different techniques. For example, these techniques can be through bodily, affective, ritual, emotional narratives, and documentary approaches are also part of it. Also, artists can use immersion, alternate temporalities, and also different world building to build these kind of portals. So, as mentioned, you might have realized or felt in the last 2 days those different realities and transported realities. And hopefully this afternoon you will feel it even more, because we will have 9 different presentations talking about portals from very different angles, and hopefully you're going to be transported into those realities too. And I have to say, if I'm talking about myself, where am I transported right now? Last 2 years we had this event online, and after 2 years, it feels so good to be here in person and welcoming you. So I definitely feel myself in a different reality right now, and after this opening and a very busy weekend, that's for sure. So let's open officially this Research Networking Day and talk a little bit about the structure of this afternoon. So we will have 3 thematic sessions. We ordered these 9 presentations into different thematic groups. And the first session got the title Political Sonic Practices, which is going to be hosted by myself. The second one has the title Future Scenarios of Non-Human Sound, which is going to be hosted by Carla Meyer. And I have to say that Christoph Jaka is unfortunately not here and not able to attend to this event today, but I'm really happy that Carla took it over, so I'm really grateful that she could make it in the last minute too. The third, last session is going to be the so-called Stories from the Machine, going to be more like a discussion on technology in a way, and this is going to be also hosted by Stefan Lepa. So thanks also to all 3, or 2, not to myself, but the other 2 moderators who also took over these roles. And so maybe a little bit definitely about the structure of those 3 sessions. First of all, the presenters will have 10 minutes to present their presentations, and which will be followed by a 5 minutes very short dialogue between the hosts and the presenters. And then it will go on 3 times within one session, and by the end of every single session we will have a group discussion. So during the group discussions, please collect your questions and raise your questions, because you will be also part of it, of course, and you can ask your own questions also online and also here in the room. So I would say we can move on to our first session straight ahead, Political Sonic Practices. So in this first section, we will have different questions. For example, how can sonic practices be political, or what does it mean to be political in this context at all, and especially in context of portals. And I have to say this topic is really dear to me, and I'm so happy that I can host this session, because this semester I teach about politicizing the dance floor, and this is why my students should be here, as mentioned. So I'm sure that they also have a lot of questions, and you all who are here in the room and the people online about these questions, because especially in 2023, I think it's a very important topic that we all have to discuss. So now I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Stas Sharifullin, and he's the only one who is going to present today online. All the other 8 presenters are here in the room. And Stas is a Bashkir-Russian, Siberian-born researcher and artist working with sound and the potentials of sonic agency. He's also an associate researcher at the Critical Media Lab and the PhD student in German Media Studies at the University of Basel, and a guest lecturer at the study program Sound Studies at Berlin University of the Arts. And I'm going to give the online stage to Stas. Hello, Stas. Welcome, and please take it over with your presentation, Becoming-Resonant on the Political Potential of Indigenous Sonic Practices in the Prison of the Nations.
Hi, and thank you for having me. Unfortunately, I cannot join on site, but anyway, okay. So today's short paper is a brief outline of my current academic research on the political agency of sound as media. By deconstructing the paper's name from the bottom to the top, I will try to outline the number of difficulties I've stumbled upon, both as a researcher and as a person, as a human being. And I must say that most of these difficulties can be observed within what is called the Eurocentric academic tradition, whether it is political science or sound studies. These traditions default modes of knowledge production, and its almost unstoppable urge to explain things exclusively in its own way. I really want to be kind, but I believe that for a certain number of Western scholars, it is also very important to reset their framework and simply start listening, which is, of course, even more related to the sound studies, where some established figures within the discipline are simply obsessed with the very idea of listening itself. Ironically, they prefer talking. And talking instead of listening might result in misunderstanding the very important contexts. And moreover, it might result in attempts to persuade everyone else that this misunderstanding is the actual way of how things are. This is partly the reason why today's paper is calling out the so-called non-Western imperialisms, referring to a hyper-problematic figure of a Russian revolutionary, Vladimir Lenin, and the notion he widely used. It's not his notion, but he really used it a lot. The notion of the Russian Empire being a prison of the nations, erasing national and ethnic identities throughout its history, and institutionalizing racism and ethnic Russian supremacy. At this point, talking instead of listening might result in misunderstanding the roots of violence, whether it is Russian colonial war against Ukraine, Turkish aggression in Kurdistan, Chinese repressions against Uyghur and Tibetan people, and unfortunately, many other things still happening outside the Western bubble. And this leads us to the definition of political potential, or simply the political. So what is the political? While focusing on the moment of sound appearing, rooted in phenomenology and caused by the very privileged position of a neutral observer, the Eurocentric essentialist model of sound studies is failing to grasp the multiple different and unique political and social contexts behind the West variety of sonic practices. It is partly caused by the recent academic obsession in what is called the inhuman or non-human or modern human and so on. So speaking of political agency, it's really hard to disagree with the scholars saying that political agency is not restricted to participation in social movements or institutional political processes, but rather it refers to a variety of individual and collective, official and mundane, rational and affective, and human and non-human, which is important, of course, ways of acting, affecting, and impacting politically. However, even if one understands sounds as a non-human species, which it probably is, they cannot exclude the subject of listening or making sounds. And every time they use terms such as the anthropology of sound, which I see quite often, there's always an anthropos, right? There's always a human being in the very center of the listening practice. Speaking of the research methodology, there are certain prolegomena which I believe should be taken into account while studying the political potential, the political possibility, or if you like, the political agency of sound. First of all, operating in the realm of political is taking the responsibility for making and listening to sounds. Again, every time when we see the word non-human written on a piece of paper, there's always a human's hand that is holding a pen. Then, in order to study a sound, one must have tools to extract and appropriate it. Thus, there is no such thing as a universal ontological model of listening or epistemological model of listening. There's only a subjective projection derived from one's positionality. And these tools of extraction and appropriation, as well as the variety of positionalities and motives behind making and listening to sounds, should appear in the very center of studying the political in the domain of sonic. And it is also simply crucial to critically approach these tools. For example, to investigate the very method of recording itself, so especially what is called the audio ethnography, through the prism of the extraction economy, for example. Next, studying sound in the domain of political should be done through examination of power dynamics, feedback, and communication, all under scrutiny. So it might be useful for sound scholars to get familiar with the methods of critical theory, political and social science, cybernetics, also known as the theory of control, decolonial, post-colonial, gender studies, and of course, many, many more. Finally, it's important to think of all sonic practices, including music, which is a sonic practice, of course, as of a non-universal and even more hyper-specific. Sound is always rooted in certain contexts and inextricably entangled with the causal relationship of the moment of its appearance. And if it appeared as a result of violence, one simply cannot unthink it, even if finding themselves in the pure ecstasy of imagining a variety of different political possibilities. To rephrase Bruno Latour, speaking about the actor network theory, the political approach to sound must not be focused on the sound's shape and actions, but on the theoretical model itself, on the way of thinking itself, on the way how we approach and think about all this stuff that will allow us to describe these details. So there's actually nothing wrong with not fully understanding how things really are. In this case, one should not try to explain these things from their very own perspective, but slowly untangle and decrypt the context to finally accept the fact that there are different perspectives as well. Sometimes the encryption of this context is the only way that allows them to exist, and this is my case. I mean, my example. We can find this mode of existence in the sonic practice called Kobayir. Kobayir is a Bashkort epic, like glorifying song, which was a crucial way to transfer knowledge and memory through the centuries of colonial oppressions. Like Bashkortostan was annexed in the 16th century, and then it still is a part of the Russian Federation, of the so-called Russian Federation. Traditionally, each Kobayir performance is preceded by a story that lies in the background. We will now listen to a fragment of Kobayir called Teftelau, which is basically occurs in musical form. I will just tell you a couple of words, and then I will ask people in the auditorium to just to play it. So the song called Teftelau, it's the name of the colonel. So the song is a curse to the Russian army colonel and the tragic date of 24th of January 1736, when himself and his troops murdered more than 1,000 Bashkirs in the village Haintos and burned it to the ground during one of the multiple Bashkir uprisings against the Russian colonial rule that took place between 16th and 19th century. So if it's possible, let's just play this tune. Okay, sorry, I can't hear what's going on in the audience. So yeah, so basically the song curse on its rocks I carved my curse. One day my descendants will read it, and this photo is the the memorial, the monument on the site of the burned village. So it's nowadays. The ignorance of Russian colonists towards Bashkir culture helped all these sonic practices to remain almost untouched. From the archival sources, we learned that not only they obviously couldn't understand the language, because like Bashkir language is Turkic, which is a very, very different language group. But they also couldn't grasp the tragedy behind the music, if I can say that, if I can use the word tragedy. So the Bashkir music, as you might heard, traditionally utilizes the major pentatonic scale. So most of these songs were thought to be something positive and even funny. And most kubayers are being accompanied by this instrument called kuray, which is a long open-end blown flute made from the stem of the plant called Ural's edge pistil. It's a tall bush. You can also find it on Bashkortostan Republic flag. It can be played by both men and women traditionally. Somehow the Russians failed to grasp the subversive and political potential of kubayers, thinking of it as a like funny music these savages play on their funny flutes while wearing their funny clothes or whatever. The acceptance of one's ignorance and an urge to learn the context lies in the basis of what I call becoming-resonant. The idea is kind of a funny word, but the idea behind becoming-resonant is a political transformation, and it derived from devenir, becoming, as described in Deleuze Guattari's Thousand Plateau, and it can be also used to describe the actual performance transformation into what I call the non-static transcorporeal sonic objects. One of the most striking examples of the actual body transformation is diplophonic or throat singing, where the performer is becoming an instrument, himself or herself. And especially Home, the two-one throat singing heavily focused on the resonant characteristics of human bodies. The interesting thing is that professional medics consider diplophonia as a specific health condition. They call it diphonia, usually studied on patients with throat cancer. It also applies to Home singers, while there's a whole area of research for this phenomenon. As proved in this medical paper, the long experience of singing Home can actually transform your body. And when it's your lifelong experience, when your body gets transformed, you cannot alienate this sonic practice from yourself. So it's already a part of your corpus, it's already a part of your reality, which is like becoming resonant in a literal way. You are becoming the resonating object. Figuratively speaking, becoming resonant is also a method on focusing on the process instead of the result. And this is also very important. One cannot appropriate music or musical instrument or sonic practice because they simply don't belong to them. One cannot alienate it, preserve it, and have it on their fingertips only when they need it. So one is becoming music, one is becoming the sound. And applying the decolonial approach to indigenous sonic practice can result in a number of important conclusions on how to study political, which we can present in a form of an algorithm of 4 phases. So first of all, it's very important to remember that colonial systems cannot be decolonized, but people actually can. And of course, indigenous people are not anyone's teachers, but process of learning their motives and their context hold a transformative potential of what I call the becoming-resonant. Otherwise, we get what I also call the hashtag decolonial situation. You might know it. So the example known to everyone is every like quasi-decolonial exhibition or music festival, like simply exoticizing indigenous people and their works. Or if we speak about Bashkir sonic practices, I have even an uglier example. So here's a guy wearing a national hat and playing kuray for the glory of the Russian army, so for the glory of the occupants, a propaganda's pathetic attempt to avoid the colonizers' responsibility for the war crimes there is. So the second phase is understanding the political potential of decolonization, which is neither a metaphor nor a tool to perform morality or authenticity for those who mistook an ongoing struggle with an opportunity to favor their own narcissistic self-absolution. It can only be done through learning the context and motives while constantly questioning the established modes of knowledge production. And of course, focusing on the process instead of getting the result might be the very first step to acknowledge the importance of resonating with the others, so that becoming resonant might become an ongoing training in de-alienation, with sound being both a media and an attraction. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Stas, for the wonderful presentation. And I think you touched upon super important topics. And I think there are a lot of questions also came out also from the audience. But now I have just a very short time to ask you one or maybe two questions about your research. And I really like that you started the whole presentation with clarifying what is political or political agency generally means, and clarifying this super westernized way of looking at being political within sonic cultures. And what do you think, how can we get closer to this? Because you talked a little bit about the indigenous practices and also non-Western, and I'm saying it again, non-Western, as a person being in the West. So as you mentioned, with the non-human is also the same problem all the time, that a human always writes this word. So I'm in this very difficult situation because I have to look back to you, that I see you. So how would you describe this, or what do you think, how can we get a little bit closer to bring in not only Western way of thinking about this political situation or being political within sonic practices? That would be my question to you. Or how can we get closer to non-Western thoughts on that?
Thank you for the question. I see my huge face on the screen, the huge screen.
Same here, so no worries.
Yeah, that's what I see. Okay. I mean, it's actually somehow described. Somehow you had an answer in your previous speech about portals, because I think that, I mean, I would encourage. I mean, I'm now in the West as well, so I would myself, and I would encourage more people in power just to create more listening spaces, because that's what I think the problem is. Because yeah, as I told in my short paper, people really tend to speak a lot about listening, but they don't actually listen. So unless there's an amazing Iranian/Canadian sonic researcher, Grześkiewicz, and as he puts it in, we listen to the listings of their listenings. So that, I guess, what actually is happening. And that is the first thing. Then the second thing is just, I don't know, be a bit more humble, because like somehow at all these conferences in the West, I see just really privileged Western researchers. I mean, yeah, taking it for granted, I'm really privileged myself, of course, but then people just go and say, we give agency to indigenous people. And so here is the stage for, I don't know, for a homemade performer. And then it looks a little bit like, it's going to be a bit harsh. It looks a little bit like a contact zoo, you know? So like, I always feel so sorry about these guys, because they're just forced to get themselves exoticized. So it's not how it works. And also, I don't really understand what means giving agency to someone, because I don't think that agency is something that you can give. It's like they already have this agency. So yeah, listening spaces, opportunities, just be there and try to listen to what people are saying. I think it's kind of the very basic thing, and also not really trying to come up with your own mindset to what already established, not trying to like gaslight people and saying that no, it's the wrong way. No, you should think it that way. And it kind of happens constantly. Like I see in the streets of Europe, on the walls of Europe, I see this hammer and sickles, like communist symbols everywhere. And people say it's about solidarity. But for me, it's not about solidarity. For me, it's a symbol of oppression. And it's kind of, sorry, it's a bit emotional.
I understand. It is an emotional topic. Maybe one last question to you, and then we can move on to the next presenter. You talked a little bit, and actually not only a little bit, a lot about Bashkir sonic practices, and I don't know if you did research on it. Maybe the answer will be just a no about gender differences, because you also mentioned that they can be practiced by different identities and different people. So, because embodiment, I think, in those practices play a very important role. So, if you did any research on that, like what are the differences between, you mentioned women and men specifically?
Yeah. The interesting thing is that Bashkir culture, as well as like Kazakh culture, Kyrgyz, which are some sort of close like neighboring nations, and Tatar culture, was heavily influenced by the Arabic culture and Islam in particular. But somehow the role of women in all of the aforementioned ethnic groups is really important. So, for example, in some of the states where Islam had more influence, women simply cannot perform. You know that you cannot play music, or women can't perform music. And here, yeah, it's kind of gender equal. Not really, of course. It was not gender equality. It was still a lot of difficulties, but still. And I don't know. We have a I mean, we've been discussing with my friends from Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and we thought that maybe we have an idea. So maybe it's the language, because like most Turkic languages, and Bashkir including, they don't have gender. So there are gendered words like mom and dad, like brother and sister, but there's no gender. So like there's just one. So the pronoun game is kind of funny. So there's just one pronoun, like ul, which means he, she, it, and yeah, I don't know. It's a great thing to research, of course. But then I guess if you're interested in this, the whole idea, like my friends and colleagues especially from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan now, and Tatarstan as well, so they have a lot of things written about the gender and the feminist perspective of all these Kipchak, Turkic nomadic cultures. So.
Thank you so much. We will get back to your presentation later on in the bigger group, so don't go too far, Stas. And once again, thank you so much for your presentation. So. Our next presenter is Hanna Grześkiewicz. So Hanna, feel free to come on stage. She's an independent curator, researcher, writer, and activist within several feminist and migrant groups in Berlin. Her research focuses on the relationship between the arts and social movements, and she has degrees from the University of Cambridge and Humboldt University in Berlin. She regularly writes about political themes related to Eastern Europe and feminism, and she has written for Positionen, Arts and Working Class, Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, Open Democracy, and Junge Welt. So, Hanna, the stage is yours, and your presentation's title is Sound of Resistance, Polish Women's Strike 2020-21.
Great, thank you so much. I hope this is working. Just a quick introduction to my work. This is part of my ongoing long-term research on the sound of protests, and that includes, the questions I'm kind of asking myself is, what does the sound of a protest tell us? How do we use sound in demonstrations, and what for? And does sound have agency in a protest? And my starting point for my research was the movement I was personally involved with, which is the Polish Women's Strike, particularly the peak of 2020, 2021, which, to give you a brief context, or jog your memory in case you didn't know about it at the time, is that on the 22nd of October 2020, the Polish Constitutional Tribunal basically banned abortion in Poland. That then sparked 3 months of protests that were almost daily, that happened in hundreds of cities and towns across the country, not only the big cities, but also smaller towns, villages, and across the entire country, which is quite different to previous waves of protest. And while it was unsuccessful, or the protest movement at that time was unsuccessful in overturning the abortion ban, it did contribute to a changed public opinion that now sits at something between 72 and 80% in favor of the legalization of abortion. But of course, with the current Polish government, that is not something that can currently happen on that level. And before I kind of launch into my approach into analyzing the sonic within protest and kind of how I'm trying to kind of figure out its role within social movements, I will play a very short video that kind of maybe brings you back to that moment. So, as you can see, that was just a short clip from Wrocław, so one of the major cities in Poland, from one of the protest days or evenings. And as you can tell from that video, even is that the streets were full, but and there were different ways of protesting, but there was also very loud, and there were different kinds of sounds being produced in the protests. And this was kind of my starting point for this investigation. And there are several concepts that I'm working with as my kind of foundations. First is the concept of sonic agency, which was introduced by Brandon Labelle, the concept of sonic fiction, which was introduced by Kodwo Eshun and developed later by Holger Schulze, which talks about the use of sound as a way of fictioning an alternative future. And but also one that maybe is the most kind of emotional for me is the concept of collective joy, which is kind of a coming together of people and creating memories and creating community through affect and emotion. And a lot of scholars argue for this being the case in protest movements. This includes Judith Butler or Sarah Ahmed, that a key driver of a sense of belonging, common ground, and solidarity, as well as being a key motivator for joining protests, is emotion. And memories of protests, which I think also is part of this, of course I'm talking now from a perspective of remembering something, and at least for me, they also live in our bodies, so they're kind of, for me, it's an embodied kind of experience, and they're also tied to complex emotions that you or I or a person feels when demonstrating, and that can range from rage to joy, from despair to hope. So I'll do like a little exercise first in that I will play you a very short clip, and then I'll play you it again with video straight afterwards. But I would first ask you to listen to it and think about what you hear and how you feel while I play it. So this is the non-video one.
Słuchajcie, policja proponuje, żebyśmy poszli chodnikami. Co wy na to? Ja pierdala, na razie do nas mówi. Pytanie, co robimy?
Tu policja. Na podstawie przepisów prawa wzywa się osoby zebrane w tym miejscu do opuszczenia, nie blokowania jezdni. Proszę o zejście z jezdni. Wasze zachowanie jest zgodne z prawem. Prosimy o zejście z jezdni. Policjantów do zachowania zgodnego z prawem.
Proszę przejść w lewo, zobaczcie, tam jest miejsce. Ale przejdą Państwo na chodnik, tam jest przejście.
So that's the first thing, and then I'll play it now with video, and then I'll just say a few words about what this kind of says to me.
Brawo! Słuchajcie, policja proponuje, żebyśmy poszli chodnikami. Co wy na to? Ja pierdala, na razie do nas mówi. Pytanie, co robimy?
Tu policja. Na podstawie przepisów prawa wzywa się osoby zebrane w tym miejscu do opuszczenia, nie blokowania jezdni. Proszę o zejście z jezdni. Wasze zachowanie jest zgodne z prawem. Prosimy o zejście z jezdni.
przejdą państwo na przód i sami wchodźcie.
So obviously, a lot of things are happening in that video also from a sonic perspective, and I don't know how you felt listening to it, but for me, firstly, it brings up a lot of complex emotions and feelings from that time. But secondly, and this is a framework that I like using, that if you think about it in terms of rhythm analysis, which is something introduced by Henri Lefebvre, we could listen to protest as a symphony of sounds. And by that, what I mean is you can try to hear who is leading the sound, who is responding or following, who is trying to dominate, who isn't. And it just kind of listening to it as a whole kind of holistic thing as opposed to just individual kind of strands. And for me, this clip is a struggle over public space, sonically. And you know, you could hear both masculine and feminine voices making announcements and giving instructions, but socialization dictates that we listen to the masculine voice more as the voice of authority. You could hear the police announcement in it, and I think, at least in me, that brings up a kind of a feeling of, I must listen to that, but there were also feminine voices saying the same, saying counter instructions, actually. There were also other groups trying to drown out the voice of the police and the sounds the police were making to try and kind of to instruct the protesters not to listen to that. So I think this is a very interesting exercise in kind of figuring out what happens also sonically within the protest and how sound actually guides us through a lot of the emotions, a lot of the processes happening. And for me, I guess the importance of that is trying to dominate public space with predominantly feminine voices is also quite, is also related to this kind of relationship, this concept of the public and the private, in that, you know, for a long time, or kind of feminine or femme-presenting people were not meant to be in public spaces in that way. The kind of design, cities also designed much more for male-presenting people, or as opposed to, you know, women. And so a lot of it is also about rethinking public space and about the importance of reclaiming public space, which I think the protests were trying to do. That's why they lasted also so long. And then another important thing for me here is that feminist protests have been peaking around the world, particularly in areas of the global south and semi-peripheries, which I would count Eastern Europe to be part of as a semi-peripheral region. And the different kind of practices happening in those areas in terms of feminist struggle are really worth following in terms of kind of both political developments and ideological developments, such as the concept of the women's strike, which started in Poland and then was followed quickly by Argentina in terms of this vocabulary, and then there was a global movement, or the kind of global coordinated women's strike across many countries. I can't remember the number now off the top of my head. But so for me, this is kind of the big context against doing this kind of investigation. And then to get a bit more specific, is there are other ways also, apart from this kind of holistic way of looking at, of hearing or listening to the sounds of a protest and trying to figure out what it is about, there are also more specific ways in which sound was used. The first example I will give is about reclaiming nationalist symbols. So maybe you see that usually on Polish Independence Day, which is on the 11th of November, the international media tends to be dominated by pictures of men with red flares walking around Warsaw and looking very terrifying. This actually is a picture from the feminist protests. So this is kind of a visual example of trying to take over symbols that were that have been kind of used and taken over in terms of kind of asking the question of who does Poland belong to, what kind of Poland do we want? Yeah, exactly. So, I will give you just one very short example of that happening with in a sonic way, which is there was one protest in Poznań, which the next day had kind of allowed for the headlines of the drivers were in support and the gays were dancing the Polonaise. It's a quote from Gazeta Wyborcza. And it's because one of the protests was a city blockade organized with a national dance, which is the Polonaise. So I'll just do a quick clip. So that's kind of just one example, and I think it's a really nice way because, of course, I think the point I'll be trying to make by the time I finish this in a few minutes is that the different kinds of way of protesting, different kind of ways of engaging protesters also meant the different people were coming out to the streets. So a different person would come to a demonstration where you dance the polonaise to one where you were walking around with red flares and shouting and kind of struggling against the police. Another thing is that, which is quite an interesting thing for me in terms of reclaiming symbols, is that also some leftist symbols were being reclaimed in that time, which is not very usual in Poland and generally in the Eastern Bloc, although I don't want to speak for the whole bloc or the whole region, but so an example I can play of that is a reworking of Bella Ciao. It will just be a few seconds of this, but it's a play on words in that ciao in Italian sounds like ciało, which is body in Polish. So the song was called Tortury Ciao, which is body tortures, and it was filmed in Krakow during one of the demonstrations.
Pewnego czwartku polski trybunał chciał przejąć moje ciało, twoje ciało. Ciao, ciao, ciao. Pewnego czwartku polski trybunał wyrzekł nam wojnę w biały dzień. Więc jeśli nie chcesz swojemu ciału powiedzieć ciao, ciało, ciao, ciało, ciao, 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 to weź transparent jak inne siostry i swój bunt po ulicy nieś.
So that's one example. And then the second, I'll just give some more examples that were quite a little bit different, going in a slightly different direction in that, going from the Sarah Ahmed quote, solidarity involves commitment and work, as well as the recognition that even if we do not have the same feelings or the same lives or the same bodies, we do live on common ground. So for me, it's about this kind of commonality in that everybody was, the intersection of people participating in these protests was really broad. It was, they were also the biggest. It was, one of the nights in Warsaw, there were, hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. There's really crazy statistics about how the percentage of the population that was actually participating, especially women. So it was really quite unprecedented what was happening at the time. They were the biggest protests since, I believe, the 80s in the Solidarity movement, although also don't quote me on that exactly. So the final kind of section is on fighting for public space and this kind of idea of the art for or of the commons. So for me, it's a kind of a question about what is the art or what is the sonic, because this is what we're talking about specifically in the protest. What is kind of music, what is sound, and who is the artist actually in these contexts, and does that matter who the artist is? And this is why I really like this kind of framing of it being an art for of the commons, as an art that's created from within and for the protest movement. It's kind of given to the movement without the need for credit in that way. So one example which is quite famous is that one of the protests, somebody for some reason played Eric Price's song Call on Me, and that worked really well with one of the chants, which was Jebać PiS, which means fuck peace. Apologies for the swearing. That was kind of another part of the protest, is that there was a lot of swearing happening in the public spaces, which was also a very unusual thing for female presenting people, women to be doing in those kind of numbers. And for me, listening to swear words being said in those kind of numbers in public space was quite a powerful experience. So I'll just play you a very quick clip of that, which is funny. I don't know why it's so quiet. I mean, it basically went on like that, but it was, from my experience of having organized protests, is that whenever we needed to boost morale, this is what we would play, because everybody thought it was fun. And I actually think that's another way of using sound, is like understanding that you are basically, a protest is a performance in some way, and you are also trying to direct the audience. So I don't know, as an organizer, you can call yourself a curator, director, dramaturg, what you want to use, it doesn't really matter, but you are still responsible for the kind of flow of it and what people are trying to get out of it. So kind of, a Polonaise-based demonstration is very different to one where you're playing something like this, or one where you are, I don't know, staging or restaging like a national play, which also happened. So that's one thing. And then another thing is it's protest chants, which I think were also very important, and I'll just play you a very quick clip of this.
The woman revolution is happening right now.
This is actually a clip from a very nice work made by Ola Janiska, who is linked to Savvy Contemporary here, which was done just after the protest started, and she kind of gathers I would recommend listening to it if you're interested in what was going on, but she also recorded some chants, and that's why I'm using a clip of her work. But for me, chants were kind of representative, or kind of a rendering of sonic fictions, and the rendering of the demands and ideologies kind of from within the movement. So in introducing radical vocabulary like revolution or care or solidarity, and concepts like reproductive justice away from kind of more simplistic things like women's rights, which doesn't really mean much. It kind of really shifted the politics of the movement. And for me, the chants were kind of a very interesting, a very important sonic rendering of all of that. So it's another way of kind of isolating an example and listening to what was actually being said and what people were trying to do in the streets. And then the last thing I will say is, before I do that, is the reason that I've chosen these is because not one person can be credited with the conception of this. It's really impossible to tell who did either of these things, but I think there were such important parts of the protest and I think they're also artistic in some ways, because of course the words you are saying and the words that are being said by everyone have a very big emotional impact. And that's why it's kind of important to also see the things that were happening from within the movement in terms of the sonic like this. And then the final thing is that in Poland during the protest, there were lots of blockades, like you saw the one organized with the Polonaise, but there were also blockades organized by various DJ collectives, including Oramix, and that kind of brought the club and party culture into the streets. And for me, that was kind of bringing out its political potential. And if you are asking people to go out into the streets in the cold, and it was cold, it was the winter, and to stay there to block the streets and to kind of keep going, you kind of need to get them warm and engaged. And marching around the city eventually is a bit exhausting. So techno marches and techno blockades were one very effective way of doing that, but of course also would attract a different audience to a Polonaise blockade. So I think all I'm trying to say is that there were very different ways of using sound and using kind of music, and that you can kind of dig deeper into a protest and see all these layers that were happening. And I will end with a very short clip of a demonstration we did in Berlin. Unfortunately, I don't have one from Poland, but we did a techno parade in Berlin as well. And yeah, I'll just end it with that, and I hope that the presentation at least kind of scratched the surface of how it's possible to think about sound in a protest movement, and the ways the sound can actually be a way of, I don't want to say manipulating, but kind of leading the politics of it. So this is the final thing.
Ja tu mówię w imieniu tysięcy kobiet, które stoją na protestach dzisiaj. W imieniu rodzin, które naraziliście na strach i wykluczenie. W imieniu dziewczyn, młodych kobiet, które wiedzą, że Polska nie jest dla nich przyjaznym krajem i będą się bały podejmować decyzje o macierzyństwie. W imieniu tych kobiet, które dzisiaj są wypisywane ze szpitali, kiedy odmawiane jest im prawo do aborcji przy wadzie letalnej, o której pani minister powiedziała, że macie pomoc psychologiczną dla dzieci z wadą letalną. Pani się douczy, pani minister, to wstyd i hańba.
Just say quickly that the reason we did this is, first of all, because this way we invite a lot of international supporters or other collectives from the city to kind of show the solidarity with the protests, but the march was also going from Hermannplatz to the Polish church, which of course was very involved in, well, the Polish church is very involved in the politics of the country, and of course also with the abortion ban. So that was that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hanna, and I'd like to invite you now for a very short discussion between us. And I guess I will have time only for a very quick question, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the methods you use when you're listening to those, because I guess you're collecting and you have a lot of videos, and then you analyze mostly the sound of it, because I really liked how you showed us also, like, first just a video and then without first the sound and then the video on top of it. So like how you do that exactly.
Oh, it's a very good question. I guess because obviously I'm working with something that's already happened, I'm finding kind of different clips, remembering kind of, I obviously remember the kind of vague timeline of it, but I am looking up different materials that I can find either from my collective here or from things in Poland. There's obviously so much material from that time. And then I just watch them and I kind of try to think, like, what am I actually listening to? What it is that, what can I hear and what is it doing to me? And I kind of try to isolate the different sounds, first of all, to kind of figure out, okay, this is happening. There's a samba band. There's also a woman making an announcement. There is, I don't know, I forgot what else was in that video. The police announcement, the people kind of shouting over it, kind of a struggle between people because the police were kind of catching people. And then when I think about this is all happening within like a few minutes of each other. Of course, the video was cut as well just to be able to show you, but then I think, like, okay, then if this is all happening at the same time, what is it actually telling about the atmosphere, the feelings in the protest, and also actual qualities of it, who was louder, who wasn't, like how they were being, of course the police has a much better speaker system than the activists had, so they were heard much better. And so I think that's the methodology. I'm just really trying to listen to what's going on and then try to put it together and kind of figure out what that could mean for the protesters. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, the way how you listen is an own methodology, I would say, because you take care of those, like, power relations and then gender differences and so on. So itself, I think it's a great method. But I just wanted to know how exactly you do that. Yeah. Thank you so much, and also for your wonderful presentation. You will be back in a second, sure. But before that, I will invite Nico to stage. Nico Daleman. So Nico is a Colombian-born musicologist, researcher, and sound artist based in Berlin. He studied audio engineering, musicology, and sound studies and sonic arts in Bogota, Boston, and Berlin. And his research and writings explore contemporary music, musical creativity, and the hybridity between musical genre and music technologies. And his writings have been published in Musiktexte, Positionen, and the Berliner Festspiele blog. And his research has been presented at conferences such as the Harvard Graduate Forum, Digital Libraries for Musicology, and Sound Studies. So, Nico, the stage is yours, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation about Cumbia.
Yeah, hi, yeah, there. Yeah, thank you very much. So I think I'm going to dive right away. I'm a little bit self-aware of the time constraints, and then maybe we can talk later about, like, how I came to this topic and how it fits into my sort of, like, research artistic practice. So, okay, Cumbia is the new punk. That was what was printed in the tickets of Frente Cumbiero's last concert in Berlin at the SO32 in Kreuzberg, so an appropriate venue. Mario Galliano and the rest of his militant Cumbia army were accompanied by local surrounding acts with a variety of tropical music. The emergence of these events in the past years, 10 years or so, could be seen as a natural development of a new immigrant community from Latin America, with Cumbia being its primary soundtrack. The malleability and flexibility of Cumbia as a genre has provided her with a long tradition of developments within migrant communities, not only within Colombia, but outside the national borders, placing her truly as a Pan-American soundtrack. And Berlin is just her last destination. As usual, the dynamics of race, gender, and class that are so unique to Latin America enter into conflict and discussion with this new territory. So what I want to do here is first present a contextualization of the tropical identity of Latin America and what some people call macondism, to then focus on the practices of Cumbia Tropicanibal that emerged in Bogota in the last 10 years. And then finally, I will present some very personal observations, both as an immigrant and as an artist in relation with Cumbia and Berlin's musical scene. So this is a brief introduction. I don't want to spend too much time here, but Cumbia is a musical genre from the Caribbean coast of Colombia that results of a combination of African, Indigenous, and European influences, and it has overcome other genres such as bambuco as the musical insignia of Colombia. There was like some mass-produced cumbia in the 70s that named Chucu Chucu that became part of this tropical soundscape. Ubiquitous in public transportation, in bars, in rocolas, and in family holidays, attaching itself to the Colombian subconscious. Likewise, it migrated to Mexico, Peru, and Argentina, and was assimilated by working-class immigrants of those countries, creating their own distinct genres and sounds. So, okay, macondism. Macondism refers to the idealized imaginary of Latin America imposed on writers and intellectuals of the region to satisfy the global north's demands for exoticism and folklorism, due to the success of Gabriel García Márquez's novel Cien Años de Soledad. It equalizes the image of Latin America as a place of violent innocence, due to the unavoidable fate of underdevelopment, civil war, and tropical mysticism. So together with Realismo Mágico, cumbia and tropical music became the symbol of Latin America. Ana Maria Ochoa suggests that vallenato is the extension of the discourse of macondism to the musical realm, in that it reinforces the idea of Colombia as a unified culture of Caribbean mysticism and ignores the complex dynamics of a pluricultural nation. Furthermore, techno-macondism is a term that Janet L. Sturman uses to refer to a new wave of tropical music at the turn of the century. Exemplified by Carlos Vives, tropical music was presented to the global markets mixed with pop-rock instrumentation, taking it from a rural music to a polished genre through overproduction in the recording studio. Nevertheless, this success does not represent the triumph of a subculture, but rather is a rebranding of folk music by and for the recordings industry. So in contrast, Frente Cumbiero belongs to a new generation of conservatory-educated musicians from the cold and rainy area of Bogota, the last imaginable place for hot tropical music. Their leaders, Eblis Alvarez, Mario Galeano, and Pedro Ojeda, found in popular tropical music a genre to create an affront to the demands of the Western-based academic music standards, both classical and jazz, the overmarket product of world music, embodied by Carlos Vives, and the traditional folklorist currents of Colombian music. Additional projects such as Onda Tropical, Los Pirañas, Romperrayo, and Meridian Brothers utilize open source software programming, guitar pedals, vintage devices, and unconventional sound design to enhance this political confrontation. The production of the music has a lo-fi and minimalist taste. The electronic sounds are rather raw, and they capitalize on the limitation of resources that is one of their characteristics that Ricardo Arias mentions as, from the proposals of the periphery of the West, as he names it. And like so, they also reject the linear hegemony of established contemporary music production workflows and successfully avoid any of the common practices of technomacondism. Yeah, one of the things that is interesting is the relationship with kitsch and camp aesthetics. So Macondism as Colombian identity based in Caribbean culture has devaluated its own symbols, turning it into a kitsch language, which is also marketed to working classes. Bogotania Cumbian or Tropicanibalismus, in contrast, turned these aesthetics inside out by making it sophisticated and global. It presents tropical music as de-romanticized, decontextualized, and recontextualized without any purposeful engagement with cultural responsibility. This reappropriation of lowbrow aesthetics is achieved by resulting in the more vulgar and crude aspects of tropical music, which also serves as a form of self-critique by pointing out to the Bogotanian hipsters self-aware appropriation of kitsch aesthetics, bluntly exposing the snobbish attitude that elevates avant-garde above pop and working class aesthetics. So here basically they are showing through these kitsch and camp aesthetics how snobbish Bogotanians are. And yeah, this is a better quote to say what I wanted to say. And yeah. And okay, then to Tropicanibalism. Mario Galliano has coined the term Tropicanibalism for his practice of an archaeological LP digging and the use of popular music as main material, which fits back to their composition, thus devouring itself. Indeed, Tropicanibalism makes references to Oswald de Andrade's Manifesto Antropófago and Eduardo Viveros de Castro Cannibal Metaphysics that recontextualize the validity of indigenous ontologies despite the tabooization of its practices. In that sense, Tropicanibal Cumbia defends the exercise of the existence of other tropical musics, one that rejects the sun and the palm trees and positions the urban nihilism in the center while rejecting joy and gozadera. Yeah, so this rejection is this rejection of the imposed heritage of Macondism also positions Tropicanibalism in the post-colonial discourse. Tropicanibalism aligns with the early critics of literary Macondism, who saw it as romantic, one-sided, and an artifice of neoliberal consumerism and pop culture. Therefore, the wordplay between Macondo and Mac-ondo of McDonald's, and yeah. So, furthermore, Tropicanibalism challenges the demands of the neoliberal markets for exotization, decolonizing the proper discourse of decolonization by presenting a different imaginary of tropical music into the eyes and ears of the global north consumers. For Erna von der Walde's views, both magical realism and post-colonialism are examples of the contradiction of the discourses imposed upon the global south, which reaffirm the colonial power structures by claiming retribution to the hegemonical investment of colonial capitalism. Postcolonialism imposes underdeveloped imaginary created by the other, the global north, into the identity of the global south. By negating a joyful image, Tropicanibalism challenges both the impositions of the global markets and the academic discourses. Likewise, apparent dynamics of cultural and class appropriation are dismissed by avoiding participation in the complex music industry, rejecting technomacondism basically. So Tropicanibalism recontextualizes into indie underground and even avant-garde markets new musics and cultural practices that have received little attention within Colombia and Latin America because their association with working class aesthetics. Yeah, just to close, I would like to argue that the presentation of this indie hipness to the global markets is precisely what is extremely appealing to the generation of Latin American immigrants, myself included, in that communities from Mexico, Argentina, Peru, Colombia can identify with a familiar genre, one that is hip enough to be claimed as an identity, but that hasn't been commercialized that much as, for example, reggaeton. In the European imaginary, cumbia still possesses an air of folklorist exoticism, actually inherent for the world music craze of the 90s, that also makes it somehow a little bit more accessible. These Tropicanibal migrations, supported by the recontextualization of the Bogotanian cumbia, has also created a more genuine interest in tropical music. And I would say that the achievement of Tropicanibalism is the demystification of cumbia as an inherent tropical genre, also making it apt for urban environments of cosmopolitan and multicultural cities such as Berlin. Like so, Tropicanibalism represents the comprehensive embodiment of postmodern aesthetics by bringing together a bricolage of artistic techniques, genres, cultures, and as it reaches out to a generation of immigrants that sings to the despair of uncertain futures, of electronic dystopias, and of infected traditions, while being aware of its position in the political global dynamics of the music industry. It is, of course, also a nostalgic device to endure the cold and dark Northern European winter, while also reaffirming a Pan-American identity. With Berlin's urban and industrial scenery in the background, cumbia has found a new home. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nico. Please come here. We will have a little discussion together, if you don't mind. I really liked your presentation, first of all. Yes, thank you so much. And when you sent in this proposal, I was already very curious about different questions, but I will ask you one thing too, because it's always in my mind this question like that: how cumbia made it into this European market? What is the secret of cumbia that it fits perfectly into this adventurous music or sound cultures in Europe? So what is that secret?
Yeah, well, I think some of the musical characteristics that have been highlighted is that cumbia is relatively simple. No, it's like a binary rhythm, and it doesn't have like this complexity of, like, for example, salsa or like these Cuban rhythms that have like the clave and whatnot. So I think it is very flexible to like explore different things, and I think it also has this sort of like I think it has like the right amount of exoticization or like folklorism, but I think this is what the Bogotanian cumbia has been able to overcome, right? That it is not I don't know, people here with like the typical costumes dancing cumbia and sort of like rescuing the traditions, but thinking them anew, and that really brings a new sort of like new interest, new material, I would say.
I also had to think of a little bit of nostalgia. Does nostalgia play a role in that, you think? Like also like bringing in like something that happened in the past and then, you know, getting a new form or whatsoever.
Yeah, I think particularly for us, I'm from Bogota as well, so I think it has this nostalgia of family reunions, no? So like this is the music that we listen in Año Nuevo, so in like Silvestre and in Christmas, and is present all over. So whether we like it or not is part of sort of like our DNA, and yeah, there is this sort of nostalgia there as well. Yeah, for sure.
Just my observation.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not true. Just
Yeah.
like I had to think of it. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to add that this is also for me like an artistic research project, and it has also allowed me to do explorations with Cumbia, and the latest installments that we've had is a transcultural exchange with some artists from Southeast Asia. And we will have a presentation this Thursday at the House of Indonesische Kultur in Tempelhof. So yeah, I'll be playing some electronic music samples, Cumbia electronic music samples, and there will be some gamelan instruments as well. So it's also, I think Cumbia has also reveled this potential for not only communications between the global north of the global south, but also these transcultural exchanges in a more parallel level.
Very
so,
nice.
Yeah, you're very welcome to attend.
Yeah, and I guess it's also part of your research, no? That
Yeah.
you also open it up to not
of
only
course.
talk. Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you so
right.
much.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Please stay here on stage, Nico, and I'd
okay.
like to ask also Hanna to come on stage, and we can also switch in Stas online. That we have group discussion at the end. We don't have so much time left because we are a little bit behind our time. But first of all, before I ask questions, I like to ask the audience. If the audience has any questions, you can also have separate questions to each presenters. You can have a general question to all of them. I can't see anything, so if there's any question from the audience. Not yet, and I guess I have to ask the first question. And hello, Stas, and Stas' cat is also there. Amazing. So, the topic of this session is political, like what does it mean to be political and political sonical practices. And just in general now, because we had 2 years of lockdown, we had the pandemic and so on, and now we are in this slowly building up post-pandemic phase. And can you reflect on those 2 years, how internet and social media played a role also in spreading the word, all of those different subjects? It's very difficult to put that question together to all of you, to each of you probably would be a different formulation for that. But still, like, what happened in the last 2 years or during the years of the pandemic, and how internet in general like also spread and added to these political aspects and spreading the word about the subjects you are also doing research on? Anyone can start, and also we can also pass it to Stas if you would like to.
Pandemic was a nice time, that's what I can say. If we take last year.
Why is that?
Really, some reasons. I mean, yeah, social media plays a big role, that's for sure. I mean, but I just don't feel that I can comment in the context of pandemic, because for me it was like totally, like really, really long in the past. So now we have more extreme situations to deal with. So, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. Maybe the others here.
I mean, for the protests happened in one of the lockdowns in Poland. So actually, there were it was quite. The internet and social media were actually very important at the time, because, of course, the protests were not legal because there was a ban on gathering issued by the government in order to kind of keep the numbers down. So actually, a lot of the protests also was happening online, which is why there is so much content online, actually, both visual and sonic, like I showed you, that it also spread things extremely quickly. So even, for a lot, I was in Berlin for a lot of it, and we would know what was going on in Poland within kind of 5 minutes, because the channels were very open and people were posting constantly. It was actually overwhelming, but we really felt like much more of I think we felt much more present in the Polish protest, despite not actually being physically there, than maybe we would have done in a previous kind of addition of the movement, because everything was just so kind of instant and online that whole time. So it was quite interesting for that. Also because, of course, a lot of people, it was in 2020 towards the end, so people were still very cautious about going out. So it was a lot of decisions had to be made to actually go out into the street. So the kind of digital space, which I also count as a form of public space, was very important being used for that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there were also some protests in 2021 in Colombia, and I think those were also very, like the topic of decolonization and post-colonial discourses was very present in some of these protests, and sort of like rethinking the national heroes and the statues and this kind of thing. And well, I wasn't there, I was here in Berlin, but I think a lot of tropical music and a lot of these re-evaluation of traditional musics was very present in those protests. So I think, yeah, that's all what I can say about the COVID part. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm looking around if there is any question in the room, or maybe, yeah, please.
Hello. My name is Laura. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very interesting. My question would be specifically to Hanna, but open to all presenters if they want to contribute. For me, it's always very emotional as well, the protest topic and also the sonic identities that go along. And I think whenever we protest, we might protest for something like the right to abortion, but there's also always a layer of protest, the right of protesting, no, or the right of civil disobedience, because often we encounter police brutality and police violence, and I feel like this police brutality has also sonic identity, and what you think about using these sounds that come from this police brutality for claiming the right to protest and claiming the right of civil disobedience without violence.
Do you mean what do I think about using them, presenting them, or in general what I think about them being used?
Any thoughts you have about the sonic identity of police brutality as separate from the sounds that gather us as protesters, or what is the power in maybe isolating the sounds of police brutality for claiming or protesting for the right to protest without violence?
Okay, I got it. Thank you for the question. I think it's a great question. Like, my first thought was actually, like, I choose not to play too much, or like not to kind of present too much, because I've realized because these things can be so emotional. I know they can be quite triggering when you hear, like, even, I don't know, like they were using tear gas. If you hear something like that going off, like, I don't want to traumatize anybody in the audience, so I choose to kind of present them more, let's say, it wasn't really positive, but the more like utopic side of things, in that the public space was being reclaimed. But of course, there was that struggle in that one video when I played the sound first. Like, that was a struggle between those two kinds of sounds. And I think it is very important to understand what you are countering, and kind of what, because of course, I don't know how much they think about sound specifically in those kind of terms, but of course the police and the authorities use sound all the time. You know, when you hear kind of, I don't know, police vans driving down the street and they're making announcements, or helicopters above you, like, all of this is part of this kind of the soundscape of authority and repression. So those are the sounds that you're actually trying to fight against within the context of the public space. So for me, it is very important to know what they are and kind of think about what was being done to counter it. But of course, the whole problem, and I guess I actually think the sound in that case is very reflective of power structures in general. They have things that are just so much louder, and they dominate the space so much more easily than you can, even with kind of thousands of people in the streets, just because they are very kind of deep sounds that kind of shake everything around you. They shake the buildings. If you have helicopters above you, like I don't know. I always find that they change kind of the atmosphere very quickly. Like, I don't know, even in Berlin, around the 1st of May, you can tell that it's the 1st of May demonstration, not even seeing any of it, because you can hear the helicopters above you and like different announcements and like people kind of marching around, and you don't even, like, you can be 2 blocks away and like not actually see any of this, but you can feel it's happening. And I think that the kind of power of emotion that comes from sound, is also used, unfortunately, on the side of repression. So. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. Is there any question in the room? Yeah, there is one question we have on the other side. The right.
Thank you, and sorry I was sitting so far away from the mic. I have a question for the first presentation and the concept of becoming resonant, which I think is really interesting, drawing on Deleuze and Guattari and making a lot of points that I think that I've also seen often in the field being discussed. And my question is, how do you concretely implement this concept without it being just kind of something that, you know, in a research setting we say, well, we've kind of thought about all these things, it's important to situate ourselves, and then we just go on doing what we always do and talk about stuff, and try to give, as you really nicely put, try to give like agency. How do we concretely implement this concept of becoming resonant? Yeah.
Thank you for your question. In general, I think the implementation of the context of this devenir or becoming, is the what I call the political transformation, or we can exclude the word political, we can say just a transformation, or maybe queering as well. So there is they have this example of a bee and a flower, right? So like the bee is becoming a flower, and the other way around, the flower is becoming a bee, but in this process, the bee is not transforming itself to a flower, and the flower is not transforming itself to a bee. They kind of getting themselves incorporated in the process of this possibility. So there is a possibility for bee to become a flower. There is a possibility, I don't know, for man to become a woman. There is a possibility for Homey throat singer to become his music. And it's the same I told you about these pronouns in the languages where there's no gender. So like in Turkic languages, it's like becoming him, becoming her, becoming it. I think it's some sort of the flow. I think it's some sort of queering the flow, some sort of like you're, when you realize that actually the whole Eurocentric model is kind of, binary, I would say, right? And it's like really based on the very, exactly the binary tools, plus and minus, man and woman, and so on. And you try to to queer it in I hope you don't get me wrong. And also, first this, and then also, what I was telling about the context. I mean, for me, it is the thing. Saying that everything we do, all the sounds we produce, and the very process of listening itself, it holds our positionality, right? So you can't do like abstract music. Abstract electronic music does not exist, because abstract electronic music, like whatever, you say, I plug my Eurorec modular synthesizer for like, I don't know, 5,000 euro, and I do some abstract music, but one cannot abstract themselves from the tools they're using, which is also really important. Like you have the ability to earn money to buy these tools, right? You have your ears are hearing well, your eyes are seeing all these things. So this is the thing that we kind of should always keep in mind. And I think there's the idea of something being abstract is really kind of a self-indulgence. And it's somehow this is somehow what I see I was studying a lot of the history of like the so-called sound art, or like the history of electronic music, like right in the 20th century, and that's what we see there. So when everyone is saying how like Luke Ferrari was so groundbreaking, right? But no one actually ever mentions that he's coming from a really wealthy family, that he has the money to buy this like Nagra field recording, right, to work with it, and that he had a really nice education. He was thought to be like a star pianist, right? So, and this is, for me, it's the first step of what I call the Becoming-Resonant, because I said there are like two options, right? The first is like in a more figurative, like in a more literal way, right? It's just acknowledging that you can't simply take things for granted. And if there are certain things you don't understand, it's not for you to exoticize it. It's not for you. It's not. You cannot just take cumbia and say, "Yeah, it's a great genre. I will be a cumbia DJ." Now it doesn't work like this. So it's kind of there has to be another layer, or you cannot take the recordings from protest actions from the feminist protest. If you are, I don't know, maybe, and make music with it, right? Because if it's not your experience, if you are a guy sitting somewhere in New York, and then you say, I will write a book about the sounds of war in Ukraine, and like, come on, how does it work? So yeah, I think it's kind of the first step.
Thank you so much, Stas. Maybe one last small question from the audience, and then we would finish. If not, I would have just a very general question to all of you, and maybe we can finish with this, that what are the next steps in your research? What are you going to do with it in the next phase? No steps.
There is a couple of topics that I want to dig in deeper. One is sort of like the gender relationships in Cumbia, actually, and this idea of camp and queerness in Cumbia that some artists have been explored recently, and I think that's for that I will need to like reinforce my gender theory background, and then there is another. There is this. So another topic. There is this sort of like attention that cumbia and tropical music has gained, which has left behind other genres in Colombia, such as the ones from the Pacific coast, where most of the Afro-Colombian population is located, and they have their own sort of like approach to contemporary music. So the newest examples, they use hip hop as a relationship with the African American genres in the States, and they mix it with like this folklore. And I think there is also something that is worth exploring. And then, I'll just keep also exploring the sonic possibilities with these transcultural exchanges and see where it takes me. Yeah.
For me, the thing that I find kind of at the moment the most interesting is the concept, is how we got to the phrase of the women's strike. And of course there's history towards that, but the fact that this phrase has been used has very, very heavy political weight and ideological weight. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out in my research right now is how much was this kind of let's call it leftist ideology actually present within the protests, and to what extent, and how much people were really understanding it as a strike, and it being kind of and then understanding reproductive labor as labor. So it's kind of, for me, going kind of back to this political roots of the project, and because the women's strike has been kind of a concept that has been used by feminists really across the world now. In Mexico, for example, now in July of last year, there was the Arab women's strike across, I think, 8 different Arab countries, which I think is really fascinating that more and more feminist movements are using this terminology. And I think I'm trying to see it as like a point of hope that if we're using terminology that is recognizing all this unpaid care work or care labor or reproductive labor being done by mostly women, that if that's being recognized, that means people are kind of trying to. There's a possibility of a shift somewhere, I hope. So for me, it's kind of responding to that.
Nice. Stas, what are you going to do in the next phase?
At this point, I'm going to quote a very well-known sonic scholar who once approached me after my presentation at one of the conferences in Europe and told me that if you want to do your PhD in Europe, you have to learn how to be more calm. That it actually happened. So maybe this is the point for me. But then, besides therapy, I think good idea could be just. I don't actually know how to deal with this kind of paradox of like how one can criticize the Eurocentric system while being a part of Eurocentric system. So I think I need to understand how can I do that? Because I don't really want to be like this kind of aggressive trickster that comes here and there and saying that all their works are bad, because I don't think they're bad, because like even if some studies comes from like phenomenological perspective, I mean I'm a big fan of Husserl. I think he was an amazing scholar. Yeah, so this thing, and also I thought about, I'm not sure how I can do it in the framework of PhD, but I really like collaborating with people, and I think I need some different perspective here. So like people from, people from the gender studies background, with a queer studies background. I think that I kind of really like it at some point. So maybe this might be the point. A lot of tasks, to be honest.
I hope you will find those collaborators, and I'm sure you will, even in the European context. I'm sure there are other people who do similar research. And actually the Research Networking Day, what we are having today, is also about that, to connect, because I think there were a lot of similarities, even though your 3 topics were very different. Actually, you came from very different angles, but I think we found here the common ground of talking about political practices and sonical political practices. So thank you so much, all of you, for your presentations, for the questions, and for everyone for being here. We are going to have now about 20-25 minutes break, and we'll go on with the second session. Thank you. Thank you.